Tonight, I'm mixing a shot of morality with a dash of rye humor. Welcome to another episode of The Philosophy of Bourbon.
It's a beautiful night for bourbon. It's always a beautiful night for bourbon, especially on a night when I've got bourbon. And tonight, I've got rye. Yeah, tonight we're drinking rye. And we're going to continue the discussion on philosophy. Tonight's topic will be morality and ethics and ethical systems. Yeah, bourbon with a shot of morality. Shaken and not stirred. Hello everyone. Tonight I'm continuing with the philosophical discussion that I began in my last video. This one will be just a little different. I'm going to do what is known as a response video. I've seen a lot of these, but I've never done one, so it's going to be a rather new experience. What is a response video, you might ask? Well, it's a video where I show clips from another YouTube video and comment on, or respond to, what is said. I think response videos can be useful, but I don't want to become a channel that makes response videos its raison d'etre. There are plenty of those, including the channel I'm responding to in this video. So don't worry, while I may do this from time to time, I have no intention of making a habit of it. The gentleman I'm responding to today, I'm calling him a gentleman because I'm assuming that he uses masculine pronouns. He calls himself Vice Rhino, and he is a heavyweight in the YouTube atheist counter-apologetics community. He's one of my favorite YouTubers, and I watch nearly every video he posts. But sometimes his anti-theistic bias creates flaws in his reasoning. He's just a little too quick to want to criticize theists. So I'm going to use a couple of excerpts from a recent video that he made to kick off a discussion of ethics and ethical systems. I'll start by stating up front that I am by no means a philosopher or an ethicist. I took a few philosophy courses as an undergraduate about 40 years ago, and that included a course on ethics. Since then, I've attended any number of seminars and webinars discussing professional ethics in a variety of fields, and I have taught business ethics at a small private university in Los Angeles. So that is my only real qualification to discuss this topic. Otherwise, as I said in the last video, I hold a doctorate in higher educational leadership and was all but dissertation in general psychology before I became unable to complete my doctoral study in that field. But first, it's time for a quick bourbon break. However, tonight's bourbon isn't a bourbon at all. It's a rye. It's not too expensive, but it is quite pleasant. Smells really nice. Woo! Tastes like it smells, at least at first as it goes over the tongue, but it finishes with a really nice spicy kick. The initial flavors are caramel and vanilla. It's got a nice mouthfeel, coats the tongue really well, but as you swallow, there is a little bit of a spicy burn to it. It's baking spices with cinnamon forward. Oh yeah, that's really good. I've always said I like a bourbon that bites me back. Well, this rye bites back. And it's not even a bourbon. So yeah, I like it, and I'm going to tell you what it is near the end of the video. Tonight's discourse will center around teleological ethics. This is sometimes referred to as consequentialism or utilitarian ethics. I'm going to present Vice Rhino, responding to Dr. Sean McDowell's moral argument for God.
divine command theory, where something is right because the powerful guy who can torture you forever said so. So even though something is objectively harmful to our well-being, it can still be considered a moral good if God said to do it. That would be the stuff like condemning the LGBTQ community, where it has been demonstrated time and time again that acceptance leads to better outcomes in many different metrics. So, in this case, God's morality leads to objectively worse outcomes and more suffering than human morality. So, I guess if we're divorcing morality from the consequences of moral actions, you could still say that God's morality is the standard for us? But I prefer to judge morality mostly by consequences, in which case being bigoted against the LGBTQ community would be immoral.
Okay, the important part of Vice Rhino's comment is his statement that consequences are the determining factor in demonstrating the ethics of a particular action. This belief of his will be very important later, but before I get to that, let me present a little bit about teleological or consequential ethics. Teleological ethics was first proposed by Aristotle, who stated that all actions lead to consequences. If an action leads to the desired consequence, it is good. If not, then it is not good. This idea was expanded into consequentialist ethics and utilitarianism about probably a little over 2,000 years later, by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who defined good as happiness. Happiness could be said to be the seeking of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, and the criticism was that the theory was too hedonistic. It was refined to take society at large into account. Most utilitarians would now say that the moral act will be the one that produces the most good for the most people. However, since few acts result in purely good consequences, and most acts also include some negative consequences as well, the moral act is the one that produces the most net happiness for the most people. Simply take the good, subtract the evil, and if you've got a lot of good, well, then it's a very moral act. A criticism of utilitarianism is that sometimes bad acts can have good consequences. Let's get back to Vice Rhino for just a moment.
We all know that torturing an innocent child for fun is wrong.
Oh, there we go. Cue the montage. Oh, he's already in this one. Whatever, we'll play it anyway.
We know that it's objectively wrong to torture infants for fun.
Every one of us knows that torturing an innocent baby for fun is wrong.
Do we understand that torturing babies for fun is really wrong?
So let me ask you this, Sean. If morality is truly objective, then why do so many apologists, yourself included, feel the need to add the "for fun" modifier to the statement torturing babies is wrong? It seems to me that this modifier is there to protect God from accusations of immorality when he does stuff like giving cancer to babies. That could be rephrased as God torturing those babies with cancer. But he's not doing it for fun, of course. He's just doing it to build character or some shit like that.
But is torturing an innocent child always immoral? Vice Rhino says yes, but I beg to differ. Say the child has leukemia and requires a bone marrow transplant. This is an extremely painful surgery. The pain is purposefully inflicted upon the child, and therefore the act is really indistinguishable from torture. However, the intended consequence is to save the child's life, which makes it a morally correct act. For fun is added by apologists to distinguish the intent of the act. The intentional infliction of pain upon the child is therefore morally correct under one set of circumstances and quite evil in others. Now let's return to Vice Rhino's earlier statement indicating that he uses consequentialist ethics to determine morality. This will be followed by another criticism of Dr. McDowell.
But I prefer to judge morality mostly by consequences, The ends justify the means, which is an interesting position to take considering that Sean is an associate professor of Christian apologetics at the Talbot School of Theology, Biola University. And when you go to the Talbot School of Theology blog, you can find articles arguing that the ends never justify the means. Though, to be sure, disagreement on stuff like this among faculty members at a single university is pretty normal, so since Sean didn't write that article, we can't assume that he agrees with its conclusions. So let me just ask you, Sean, do the ends justify the means for God? Your addition of "for fun" in the statement torturing babies is wrong suggests that you believe that they do.
This is where Vice Rhino's lack of understanding of ethical theory becomes most apparent. Quote, "The end justifies the means," unquote, is a common criticism of consequentialist ethics, the very ethical system that Vice Rhino says that he prefers to use. He is criticizing Dr. McDowell for applying the ethical approach that he himself states that he prefers. To illustrate why this is a criticism of consequentialist ethics, consider this. A mad scientist believes that climate change will result in the end of the world as we know it, and decides desperate times call for desperate measures. Working in a secret laboratory, he develops a virus capable of wiping out a large percentage of the Earth's population. And then he unleashes it in various countries throughout the world, and half the world's population dies. But as a result, carbon emissions are drastically reduced, because half the people would produce probably half or even less than half of the carbon, and climate change is no longer an issue. Furthermore, the survivors, especially those in poorer countries, will be necessary to perform the jobs and the tasks that were once performed by the now deceased portion of society. They will need to be educated and trained. They will become employed, and their standard of living will be far higher than it was prior to the pandemic. Their well-being will have been increased. Additionally, future generations are much better off because they now actually have a chance to live and thrive instead of the human race going extinct. Thus, over time, the well-being of the entire human race is increased. According to consequentialist ethics, this mad scientist might just qualify for sainthood. I think you can see the problem here. Most of us would nominate this mad scientist for the electric chair, not sainthood, as might be suggested when judging morality only by its consequences. So where does objective morality fit into this discussion? That is the crux of Vice Rhino's dispute with Dr. McDowell. According to Vice Rhino, morality can only be objective if there is no mind involved, including the mind of God, because a mind makes it subjective. Judgment, which is required as part of morality, is entirely a human mental process. Therefore, Vice Rhino has successfully defined objectivity right out of existence. If no value can exist without the existence of a mind, then nature must be morally neutral. The consequences of Vice Rhino's reasoning eliminate the problem of natural evil. If nature is morally neutral, then natural evil cannot exist. It is then much easier to argue that evil is a human creation, even if you believe God exists, and the myth of the Garden of Eden, which I do not personally take literally, is an illustration of how man created evil, since man is the only animal capable of the kind of reason required to create morality. It can be argued that God created a neutral world and that man created both good and evil. Of course, no God is required as part of this argument. It does not prove his existence. The problem of evil does not quite go away, but it is much less of a problem unless you are a Bible literalist. But that's a video for another time. So that's it for tonight's video. I'll definitely be discussing other ethical systems such as virtue ethics and deontological ethics in later videos. But hang on, I still haven't told you what I'm drinking. Yeah, here it is. Tonight's bourbon was in fact a rye and not a bourbon, but my choice has a lot to do with tonight's discussion of morality. It's absolutely a killer rye, and depending on your ethical reasoning, it can be consumed completely, absolutely without guilt. Of course, it's Rittenhouse Rye. Okay, probably a tasteless joke that should require a trigger warning, because the consequences of making such a joke could trigger some people. However, since I don't judge an act as moral or immoral simply by its consequences, I take intent into account. The intent of that joke was to amuse and to entertain, as well as to make this point. It is not in the least bit immoral or unethical. All right, if you like my videos, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and tell me what you think. Inquiring, morally judgmental minds want to know. And hey, y'all come back now, you hear? And thanks for watching. So what does all this have to do with bourbon anyways? Can't really say I know, but it's been fun trying to figure it out.